The boardroom reeked of power, polished mahogany tables, glass walls gleaming under the midday sun, the faint hum of the city far below us. The air conditioning whispered overhead, cool against my skin, but nothing could ease the heat crawling down my spine as I slid the proposal across the table. My voice was steady, trained, measured, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this pitch 100 times in front of mirrors and sleepless nights. But beneath the polished veneer, my chest thrummed with something far less controlled. Hunger. Not just for the deal, not just for the funding that could launch my company into orbit. No. Hunger for the man sitting across from me. Damian Cross. Even his name carried weight. Investor. Strategist. Ruthless, they said. A man who devoured deals and spat out competitors without a second glance. I should have feared him. I should have focused on my numbers, my slides, the bulletproof plan I'd spent months perfecting. But the moment he walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, his suit fitting like it had been cut from midnight silk and molded to his frame, my throat went dry. His eyes were the kind of gray that could slice straight through steel. They lingered on me a moment too long when he took his seat, and in that second, every rehearsed line in my head faltered. I pushed the folder closer, my fingers brushing the smooth leather of his briefcase as I pulled away. The projections are solid, I said, forcing confidence into my tone. We can break even within the first 18 months. He leaned back in his chair, broad chest stretching the crisp fabric of his shirt, one arm slung lazily along the armrest. He looked at me like he had all the time in the world, like the numbers were secondary to the man presenting them. Ambitious, Damian murmured, his voice low, velvet over steel. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, more of a test. But tell me, Ethan, do you gamble with certainty or do you gamble with desire? My mouth went dry. For a second, I forgot the next slide, forgot the safe words I had prepared. That single sentence twisted in my gut, not as a business question but as something far more intimate. I don't gamble, I replied, though my voice betrayed a faint rasp. I calculate risk. He chuckled, the sound dark and rich, sliding under my skin. We'll see. The meeting went on. Questions, counters, numbers volleyed across the table. But it was never just numbers. It was the way his eyes held mine longer than they should, the way his voice dropped lower whenever he addressed me directly, the subtle flex of his jaw when I pushed back harder than he expected. By the time the papers were stacked neatly in front of us, the air between us was no longer businesslike. It was charged. Heavy. Damian extended his hand. Then we have an agreement. I reached across the table, my palm pressing into his. His grip was firm, almost bruising, his skin warm against mine. Neither of us let go quickly. The silence stretched, filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and the pounding of my pulse in my ears. For a moment, the world outside the boardroom disappeared. The contract was clear. Funding in exchange for shares. Nothing personal. Nothing complicated. And yet, when Damian's gaze dipped, lingering for a fraction of a second on my lips, the room tilted. I caught the subtle flex of his jaw, the twitch in his temple, and knew with absolute certainty, it was already too late. Professional respect hid something darker, hotter. Something neither of us dared name. We finally released each other's hands, but the phantom weight of his grip clung to my skin. I closed my folder, trying to steady my breathing. I'll have my team send over the finalized documents. Do that, he said, rising to his full height. The room seemed smaller when he stood, his shadow stretching across the table. His eyes never left mine. I'll look forward to our future meetings. The way he said it made my stomach twist. Future meetings. Not deals. Meetings. Encounters. I should have left then, walked out with my dignity and my plan intact. But my feet hesitated just for a heartbeat as his scent, sharp cologne, wood and smoke, washed over me. I forced myself to move, to gather my things, to escape before I made a mistake. But the door closed behind me with a quiet thud and I knew. The deal was signed. But the real terms of engagement hadn't even begun. I told myself it was just a drink. Nothing unusual about an investor wanting to talk business after hours. Damian Cross wasn't the kind of man you declined. Not if you wanted his funding, his contacts, his influence. And yet, when my phone buzzed with his message, meet me for a drink. Let's talk numbers. I stared at the screen far longer than I should have, my pulse doing things it had no business doing. It was late. I'd just gotten home, loosened my tie, unbuttoned the top of my shirt. I should have said no, drafted an email instead, set up a proper meeting in his office. But the thought of him waiting somewhere, expecting me, set something hot and reckless loose in my chest. I typed back before I could overthink it. Where? The bar he chose was one of those upscale, low-lit places where the whiskey cost more than my weekly grocery bill. Dark wood, golden lamps, the faint hum of jazz in the background. I spotted him immediately, sitting in a corner booth like he owned the entire establishment. Which honestly he probably did. Damian looked devastating out of the boardroom. No suit jacket this time, just a crisp white shirt with the top 2 buttons undone, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing strong forearms dusted with dark hair. He swirled a glass of whiskey in his hand, and when his eyes found mine, something in my stomach flipped. Ethan. His lips curved into that almost smile, the kind that made me wonder what it would take to see the real thing. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure either, I admitted, sliding into the seat across from him. My voice was steadier than I felt. You texted late. His gaze swept over me slowly, deliberately, lingering just long enough to make heat crawl up my neck. And yet here you are. The waiter appeared with another glass, filled it without asking. Damian must have ordered it for me before I arrived. A small gesture, but intimate in its assumption. We talked numbers at first. Expansion plans. Projected timelines. He listened intently, but the sharp investor edge I'd seen in the boardroom was softened here. Or maybe it wasn't softened. Maybe it was sharpened in a different way. Every question felt less like a test of my pitch and more like a test of me. And then, just like that, the conversation drifted. Do you ever sleep, Ethan? He asked, sipping his drink, gray eyes glinting under the warm light. I laughed, shaking my head. Sleep is for people who can afford to take their foot off the gas. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice dropping lower. That hunger will burn you alive if you're not careful. And you would know? I countered, smirking before I could stop myself. His lips twitched, amused. Oh, I know better than most. The way he said it, dark, reflective, like the words carried a history I couldn't see, made my chest tighten. I wanted to ask. I wanted to know more than the headlines, more than the investor profiles. I wanted to know him. Somewhere between the second and third glass, the air shifted. It wasn't the whiskey making me bold. It was the way his knee brushed mine under the table, subtle at first, then deliberate when I didn't move away. It was the way his gaze dipped to my mouth when I spoke, the way silence stretched just a second too long between words. Tell me something, he said suddenly, leaning back, his arm draped over the back of the booth. His body was angled toward me, open, relaxed in a way that made me ache. If you weren't doing this, building companies, chasing deals, what would you be doing? I frowned. No one ever asked me that. Not investors, not colleagues, not even myself. I don't know. This is all I've ever wanted. Everyone has a fantasy, Ethan. His voice was low, coaxing. Not numbers. Not balance sheets. Something else. The word fantasy curled hot in my gut. My throat went dry. I should have laughed it off, should have deflected. But the way he was watching me, the sharp edges of him softened by the golden light, I found myself saying, maybe I'd travel. Maybe I'd stop running for once. Just breathe. Something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe, or recognition. And who would you breathe with? My chest tightened. My glass was empty, but I lifted it anyway, buying myself a second. My eyes met his over the rim, and I didn't look away. The answer sat heavy on my tongue. You tell me, I said quietly. The silence after that was electric. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He just studied me, eyes darkening like storm clouds gathering. When his hand moved, slow and deliberate, sliding across the table to rest against mine, I didn't pull away. His thumb brushed the back of my hand once, barely a touch, and it burned like fire. You're playing a dangerous game, he murmured. So are you. My voice was rougher than I intended. We didn't kiss that night. Not really. But the way his hand lingered, the way his leg pressed against mine under the table, the way he walked me out of the bar with his hand on the small of my back, it was more intimate than any kiss I'd ever had. And when we stood on the sidewalk, the city buzzing around us, his car waiting at the curb, he leaned in close, so close I felt his breath against my ear. You remind me of myself when I was younger, he said, voice husky, his lips almost grazing my skin. Ambitious. Reckless. Hungry. I swallowed hard. Hungry for what? His eyes found mine, unguarded for a fleeting second. Then the mask slipped back into place. He stepped back, his driver opening the car door. For everything, he said simply. And then he was gone, the car pulling into traffic, leaving me standing there with my pulse hammering and my body aching for more. That night, lying in bed, the city lights flickering through my window, I couldn't shake the feel of his hand on mine, his breath against my ear. The contract hadn't changed. But I had. Something had shifted, something dangerous and undeniable. And I knew, deep in the pit of my stomach, that I wasn't just doing business with Damian Cross anymore. I was already entangled. The moment it happened, I swore to myself it was a mistake. A lapse. A burn of stress and whiskey. Something we could shove back into the shadows and pretend never existed. But Damian Cross wasn't the kind of man you could forget. He was the kind of man who branded himself into your skin, your memory, your very breath. And that night, the night the contract shattered beneath the weight of something hotter, rawer, everything changed. It started innocently enough. We'd wrapped another meeting. I was exhausted, but buzzing from the adrenaline of negotiating with him. Damian had a way of pushing me to the edge, challenging, provoking, testing me until I burned with a mix of irritation and fascination. "Drink?" he asked as casually as if it didn't mean anything. I should have said no. I should have walked away, gone back to my sterile apartment, reviewed the numbers like a good little entrepreneur. But the way his gaze pinned me made resistance impossible. "Yeah," I heard myself say. We ended up in the bar of his hotel. Dark leather booths. Dim lights. A jazz singer crooning low in the background. He ordered whiskey neat. I matched him, though the burn clawed down my throat with every sip. We talked about the deal, about the market, about risk and reward. But somewhere between the third glass and the way his knee brushed mine under the table, I realized we weren't talking about business anymore. "You're ambitious," he said, leaning closer, his voice dropping lower than the singer's velvet tone. "But you play with fire. You know that." I smirked, though my pulse hammered in my ears. Takes one to recognize one. His lips curved. God, that half smile could dismantle empires. Maybe. That was the moment. That exact second. The one where the room shrank, the world dimmed, and the space between us felt hotter than the whiskey sliding down my throat. I knew it was wrong. Knew every clause of our contract screamed professionalism. But when Damian's hand brushed mine on the table, deliberate this time, my breath hitched. And when he didn't pull away, neither did I. We made it to the elevator without a word. The tension between us thickened, pressing down on me until I thought I'd choke. I swore I'd hear the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in that steel box forever. The doors slid open to his floor. He stepped out. I should have stayed behind. But his hand shot out, fingers wrapping around my wrist, firm, commanding, irresistible. "Come," he said. Just that one word. And I followed. His suite was sleek, masculine, smelling faintly of leather and cologne. He shut the door behind us, locking it with a click that sounded like a verdict. We stood there staring at each other. No contract, no signatures, no rules left. Just raw, unspoken want. Damian moved first. One step, then another, until he was in front of me. His hand came up, fingers brushing along my jaw, calloused and warm. "You know this is reckless," he murmured. "Yeah." My voice cracked with need. "So stop me." He didn't. Instead, his mouth crushed against mine. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tentative. It was fire-igniting paper, a blaze consuming oxygen. His lips were firm, demanding, and when his tongue slid against mine, I moaned into him like I'd been starving for years. I grabbed fistfuls of his shirt, pulling him closer, needing him, hating him, craving him all at once. He tasted of whiskey and sin, his breath hot, his kiss punishing. When he shoved me against the wall, I gasped, my body arching into his. His thigh pressed between mine, hard, relentless. The heat pooling in my gut threatened to explode. "Damian," I groaned, half a plea, half a curse. "Say it again." His teeth grazed my jaw, scraping heat down my neck. "Damian." His mouth found mine again, swallowing my voice. Clothes came undone in a frenzy. His shirt yanked open, buttons scattering, my jacket hitting the floor. His hands tugging at my belt with ruthless precision. Every touch felt like ownership, every kiss like a claim. "You're mine tonight," he growled against my skin, and I let him. The bed swallowed us. Sheets twisted, bodies collided. His weight pressed me down, firm and grounding, but it only made me ache more. He explored me with hands that knew power, control, authority. Every stroke down my chest, every grip on my hips, every bite at my throat left me trembling. "Look at you," he whispered, eyes blazing as he hovered above me. So eager for someone who should be off limits. "Then stop," I shot back, breathless. His smirk was pure sin. Not a chance. When his mouth trailed lower, leaving wet heat across my skin, I thought I'd lose my mind. My fingers tangled in his hair, tugging, urging, begging. The sounds spilling from my throat weren't professional, weren't controlled. They were desperate, needy, real. And when he finally gave me what I craved, pleasure ripped through me like lightning. After we lay tangled in the sheets, the room heavy with the scent of sex and sweat and something dangerously close to intimacy. I should have spoken. Should have drawn a line in the sand, reminded both of us this wasn't part of the deal. But Damian reached over, dragging his thumb along my lower lip, and the words died in my throat. "This changes nothing," he said. I nodded even though my chest ached. Nothing. But I knew we were both lying. Because the contract wasn't the only thing binding us anymore. The morning after should have been easier. But as I buttoned my shirt with shaky fingers in Damian's hotel room, the sheets still tangled around his body like they owned him, I realized nothing would ever be easy again. I told myself it was just sex. Just a lapse in judgment. A way to blow off steam after weeks of tension. But the truth was more dangerous. The truth was that I couldn't stop wanting him. Damian sat up against the headboard, hair messy, chest bare, the faintest smirk on his lips. Watching me. Always watching. "You're leaving?" he asked, his voice still husky from sleep. "I have to." I forced a steady tone, though my pulse betrayed me. "We've got a meeting at 10. He hummed low like he was amused. "We could skip the meeting." I shot him a look, tightening my tie. "We can't. This deal matters." "And last night?" The question burned. I swallowed hard. "Last night was nothing." His smirk deepened. "Funny. Didn't feel like nothing." I turned away, grabbing my jacket, refusing to answer. If I lingered, I'd climb back into that bed, into his arms, and the whole damn contract would unravel before my eyes. The boardroom was merciless in its brightness. White light. Blast. Cold air conditioning. Numbers and clauses and shareholders staring back at me from across the table. I kept my voice steady as I presented, but inside chaos reigned. Because every time I met Damian's gaze, I remembered his hands on me, his mouth, his voice whispering things that had nothing to do with business. And worse, he looked back at me like he remembered too. At one point, when the others debated terms, Damian leaned toward me. Not close enough for anyone else to notice, but close enough for me to feel the heat of him. "You're distracted," he murmured, low enough that only I heard. I forced a tight smile. "I'm focused." "You're lying." His lips curved just slightly. "And I like it." My throat went dry. Goddamn him. After the meeting I tried to escape. I told myself I needed air, space, distance. But Damian was faster. He caught me in the hallway, hand on my wrist, pulling me into an empty office. The door shut with a click that felt too familiar. "Damian." "Don't," he cut in, pressing me back against the wall. His body caged mine, the scent of his cologne dizzying. "Don't pretend this doesn't matter." "It can't matter," I hissed, though my hands had already found his chest. He leaned in, his breath hot on my ear. "Then why are you shaking?" I hated that he was right. I hated that my body betrayed me, arching into him even as my brain screamed stop. His mouth claimed mine before I could answer. The kiss was brutal, desperate, like he wanted to devour every ounce of denial left in me. And God help me, I let him. I moaned into him, my tie yanked loose, his hands sliding under my shirt. Heat surged through me, need overtaking reason. "This is insane," I gasped between kisses. "Then let's go insane together." His voice was rough, commanding. "You're mine, Ethan. Whether you admit it or not." And when his hand dipped lower, stealing my breath, I stopped caring about consequences. We barely made it out of that office in one piece. I fixed my tie, flushed, while Damian smirked like the devil himself. "You're reckless," I accused. "You like me reckless," he replied. And maybe I did. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Every choice felt heavier now. The deal. My reputation. My ambition. But when I closed my eyes, all I saw was Damian. His mouth, his hands, the way he looked at me like I was more than just another contract. I told myself I could compartmentalize. Keep passion in one box, business in another. But the lines were already blurred. And deep down, I knew they'd never be straight again. I'd thought numbers were simple. Profits, losses, equity shares, things you could measure, weigh, decide with cold precision. But nothing about Damian Cross was simple. Not the deal we'd signed, not the nights tangled in his sheets, not the way my chest ached every time I left him. Business was supposed to be about control. Instead, I was losing mine. The storm hit on a Tuesday. The board discovered a conflict of interest, rumors of unprofessional closeness between me and Damian. Whispers flew. Questions about favoritism, about whether our deal was biased. I sat in that sterile conference room, shareholders glaring like vultures, and all I could think about was how his mouth had felt on mine just hours before. Damian sat at the head of the table, calm as ever, a predator among sheep. But his eyes flicked to me once, sharp and unreadable, and I knew we were cornered. "This deal stands," Damian said, voice iron. "Not because of gossip, not because of scandal, but because it's profitable. Vale has vision. I back him. That's all that matters." His tone was ruthless, final. But under the table, his hand brushed mine for the briefest second, hidden from everyone else. And in that touch, I felt everything he wasn't saying. Afterward, I found him in his office. "You protected me," I said quietly, shutting the door. He leaned back in his chair, eyes burning into mine. "I protected the deal." I shook my head. "No. You protected me." Silence stretched heavy. Then he rose, coming around the desk. "Maybe I did." When he reached me, his hand cupped my jaw, thumb stroking the corner of my mouth like he owned it. "And that's the problem, Ethan. I don't protect people. I don't get involved." "Neither do I," I whispered, though my voice cracked with the lie. "Then why does this feel different?" I couldn't answer. Not with words. So I kissed him instead. It wasn't like the others. This kiss was slow, lingering. Not a battle, not a firestorm, but something raw and terrifying. His mouth moved against mine like he was memorizing me. My hands gripped his shirt like I was afraid he'd vanish. When we broke apart, our foreheads pressed together, I whispered the truth that had been clawing inside me for weeks. "I don't want this to end." His breath shuddered. "Ethan." I searched his face, saw the cracks in his armor, the man beneath the ruthless investor. "Damian, screw the contract. Screw the shareholders. I want you." The silence after that was brutal. My heart pounded so loud I swore he could hear it. Then his lips curved, slow, dangerous, real. "Careful," he murmured. "You sound like you're in love." "Maybe I am." The words fell out before I could stop them. And for once, Damian Cross, untouchable, unshakable, looked shaken. We didn't make it to the bed this time. The desk bore the weight of us, papers scattering, pens clattering to the floor. His mouth devoured mine, hands gripping me like he'd never let go. I tugged at his tie, desperate, needing him closer, deeper, harder. "Mine?" he growled, voice breaking as he pushed me down against polished wood. "Yes," I gasped, arching into him. "Yours." Every thrust, every kiss, every mark he left felt like a vow neither of us could take back. And when release tore through me, shattering, I knew this wasn't just lust anymore. This was something I couldn't undo. Later, when we lay in the mess we'd made, Damian lit a cigarette, his bare chest rising and falling. He looked at me through the haze of smoke, expression softer than I'd ever seen. "The contract was supposed to bind us professionally," he said slowly. "But I think it did something else." "Yeah," I whispered, tracing circles on his skin. "It bound me to you." For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he stubbed out the cigarette, rolled toward me and kissed me, gentle, almost reverent. "Then maybe that's the only obligation that matters." Weeks later, the deal was finalized. Profits secured. The board satisfied. But when I walked into Damian's office, closing the door behind me, he didn't look at the papers on his desk. He looked at me. And in his eyes, I didn't see an investor or a contract. I saw a man who had let someone breach his walls. And maybe, just maybe, fallen too. Ethan thought it was just a contract. Damian thought it was just business. But passion rewrote the fine print, binding them in ways no signature ever could. Their deal ended, but their story had only just begun. If you enjoyed this steamy ride of love, power, and desire, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more hot BL stories that will leave your heart racing. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode.